Hi, this is South Asia Matters on Awaaz South Asia. I'm Nirupama Subramanian, and with me today is Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, a distinguished former member of the Indian Foreign Service and a fellow of Gateway House. Today, we are going to discuss the situation in Myanmar. And Ambassador Bhatia, welcome to South Asia Matters. Thank you for your time. My first question to you about Myanmar is, we seem to be on the side of the military in this. Is that the right side for us to take?
Thank you very much for inviting me and starting off with the most complex and difficult question. I think we need to break down this question into two parts. I think those of us who have been following Myanmar closely, and certainly you have been doing it for years, and this Myanmar bug caught me when I served as India's ambassador there some 20 years back. But since then, I've kept in close touch. So what I want to do is to point out that in the Myanmar polity, there have always been a triangle that is used to understand the political situation. There is the military, there are the political parties, and there are ethnic groups. And therefore, never since 1948, this has been a straight fight between the political parties and the military, that is for democracy or military rule. It has also been very much about the completion of the state building. The ethnic groups which have been there on the periphery all around the Bamar heartland have been a major stakeholder and factor. So when we discuss the matter today, roughly 2.5 years after the military coup in 2021, we see that there are two parallel conflicts which are running. One is between the people who have formed the parallel government named National Unity Government and the military. This fight is very much for restoration of democracy and for sending the military back into the barracks. On the other hand, there have been a series of ethnic conflicts in the past 3 years also. I'm not going to the foreground or history. And this has now culminated in what happened at the end of October, when the ethnic groups, certain ethnic groups, and probably we'll go into that, managed to inflict serious reversals on the military. So to answer your question directly, is India on the side of the military? I would say in a limited manner, yes, because they are still the government of that country. They are still in charge of the national capital. They are the only recognized authority in the country. But we should not make the mistake to assume that India is completely ignoring the other two angles of the triangle of Myanmar.
So, how is it not ignoring those two sides, the ethnic groups and the national unity government? Is there an outreach from the government to these two sides as well? Because if it is, then it is not in the public realm.
Right. So here, I think a very quick reference and a very brief reference to history would do. In the 90s, when there was a major political crisis in Myanmar and Madame Aung San Suu Kyi was emerging as the central political heroine of the Myanmar drama, I know very well, and this is very well documented, Indian authorities used to keep in touch with several ethnic groups that were operating on the Myanmar-Thai border. They had their outfits in Bangkok, and there used to be discussions and dialogue. So there is no, sensitivity that Indian government would not talk to the ethnic groups. Similarly, on our side of the border, that is Western Myanmar, where Chints and Rakhine's are very active, I would be very surprised if there is no communication and there is no dialogue. Now, naturally, these things, they all cannot be brought into the public realm for obviously the reasons of the state. But I would say that some dialogue or some communication with certain groups probably is already a fact of life. And on top of that, I think National Unity Government, some of their representatives have been quite active in India, and they have been in touch with think tanks, academics, intellectuals, media people And again, I would not be surprised if they have a line of communication with some parts of the Indian government.
But there has been some very strong signaling in the recent past from the government, from Delhi, uh, uh, that it supports the military. One was the presence of the Deputy National Security Advisor at the anniversary of what is known as the National Ceasefire Agreement, when all these ethnic organizations you just spoke about signed an agreement with the then civilian government and the military for a ceasefire. And this was in 2015. And our representative, the Indian government's representative, was present in Naypyidaw, along with just only two others, the Thai representative and one from China. And just as the ground seemed to be shifting under the feet of the military junta, because just 7 days after this ceasefire anniversary was observed, you saw that resounding defeat that you just spoke about, the huge conquests made by three ethnic groups that came together to inflict those defeats on the Myanmar military. How would you read that signal? It was as it came from Delhi.
So it's a complex signaling. Fundamentally, what it means is that, yes, the presence of Vikram Misri, the Deputy National Security Advisor, who incidentally is a former ambassador to Myanmar and who understands Myanmar and the region extremely well. He was also our ambassador to China. So his presence obviously was meant to assure or reassure Naypyidaw, that is the headquarters of the government, that India remains supportive of them. And then secondly, we saw that when a certain number of Myanmar army soldiers were trapped in terms of attacks by the Rakhine or Chins on them, the authorities came forward to help them. They were allowed to come into India, and then they were flown immediately back into Myanmar at another point.
Exactly.
And on top of that, our ambassador continues to conduct normal, regular business with all departments and ministries of the government. So all this shows that India is still invested in the political government of that country. As I mentioned, all these ambassadors are accredited to the government of Myanmar. As long as they are in power, we have no choice. That is, the government has no choice but to do business. At the same time, I can assure you, based on very clearly the inputs which are coming in from the MEA and other parts of the government, there is a concern. There is a concern that instability in Myanmar is increasing instead of decreasing. And this new development that you have referred to, I think, is particularly important to note. The Brotherhood, the three Brotherhood alliance of three different armies. One is the Kokang army, and the second is the Tang army, and the third is the Rakhine army. These three, as far as I remember, are not part of the ceasefire agreement groups. They are the ones which never accepted the original ceasefire in 2015. So they are serious and doing what they can. They have complex motivations.
Ambassador Bhatia, let me say that the MMDA and the Arakan Army were signatories, I believe, to that ceasefire agreement. And also the fact that, you refer to the government, the military, as occupying the seat of power, therefore we have to do business with them. But are they really in charge? Because there's not been a single day since they seized power in February 2021 that they can have claimed to control the entire country. Because from immediately after the coup, there has been a very strong resistance from these armed civilian groups called the People's Defense Forces against any attempt by the military to establish control in several places. So there is even a debate about whether the PDF controls more territory now than the military. And also with these reversals in Shan state by the Three Brotherhood Alliance, and then in the Chin state and in Rakhine state, questions arise about how much really does the military control.
I can add to that, actually. There are also parallel conflicts going on in the Kaya state, in the Kachin state, and of course, Karens have also been active.
Yes.
So yes, I think it is very true to say that the Myanmar government is under pressure, not merely from the political wing of the opposition, which is obviously backed by PDFs in various parts, even of the heartland of the Bamar community, but also from the various ethnic armed groups which are spread on the periphery of Myanmar. So this is a fact. But I want to stress that even before 2021, Myanmar military at its height has never had a full control of the entire Myanmar territory ever from 1948. There have always been pockets which have stayed away from their control. What is now happening is that those pockets have become much larger. Uh, Now, because the journalists do not really have access to the most of the countries, we keep hearing all kinds of reports. It's very difficult for people outside to reach some full conclusion about the exact, size of territory held by one or the other stakeholders. But for whatever worth it is, my interpretation of the situation is that, uh, you know, there were two stages when the government came under serious pressure. One was in the months after the coup in 21, the first 6 months, when the movement was truly waged at the popular level. There was first peaceful agitation, and this was all happening in the heartland, in Yangon, Mandalay, and large towns. And that is where it looked that it's going to be not just a rebellion, it's going to be a revolution. But all that was obviously crushed or petered out. And then for almost next 2 years, it was PDF, individual, somewhat uncoordinated attacks all over the place. But now this is the second challenge, which has come at a very crucial region which connects Myanmar to China in northern Shan states. And there, as you would be knowing very well, there are many motivations, including the role and motivations of China. Because what is happening in that region, we need to explore very clearly as to what the Chinese game is. China remains the most important foreign player in Myanmar. And therefore, considering that it is India's concern that China's footprint should not be expanded in Myanmar, this is a factor that has to be taken into account by the Indian authorities.
So you're saying that the China factor is what keeps us engaged with the Myanmar military, because we are concerned that China should not really expand its influence there, and also the instability itself must be causing concern in Delhi, because a number of thousands of refugees have poured in from the Chin state, which is exactly on the border with Mizoram and some of Manipur, they have come into Mizoram, and also a few into Manipur. So if these are the concerns, how is the military addressing these concerns for us?
The refugees which have poured into the two Indian states that you have mentioned is definitely an immediate concern. It's a concern on which the military cannot help India very much, because the outflow is happening because of the conflict between the military and the ethnic groups.
Yes.
And therefore, if stability is the main consideration, then clearly, as I hinted earlier, Indian authorities have to be in touch with both the military and the ethnic groups. In any case, the strategy is to minimize the inflow and to deal with it at the level of the states. The central government, at least in public, does not seem to be, excited about this. And the only time they really came into play was when there was some kind of a rescue attempt launched and executed quite swiftly when it concerned the safety of the Myanmar soldiers.
There is
And just
also
one more additional point. Yeah, one more additional point. I think as I began right at the outset, the motivations always remain complex. We cannot reduce it to one factor. Therefore, we cannot say that China factor molds and determines India's Myanmar policy. There is very much the larger issue of the Northeast security, the economic development and connectivity of Northeast with Myanmar, and of course the larger ASEAN question. And I should bring in here another important fact, that those who are trying to mediate between the army and the democratic camp, that is ASEAN, and they have more or less failed so far to achieve anything significant, they also have been very quiet in terms of this ethnic action which has been happening, ethnic groups action which has been happening. So everybody is concerned, everybody is perplexed, and they all have to develop or redesign their policy approach towards Myanmar.
You just spoke about the security of the Northeast, and I think your reference may have been to the insurgent groups that operate along that border, and that at some point have always found safe havens in Myanmar. And our outreach to the military in the 90s, beginning in the mid 90s, was to ensure that those insurgents don't get safe haven. What is the situation now? Because there are some reports that the Myanmar army is in fact recruited some of the insurgent groups like the PLA to fight on its side against the People's Defense Forces, against the civilian militias that have risen up against the army. So wouldn't that be a concern for us, if particularly they're arming those insurgent groups and reorganizing them to take on the civilians in Myanmar? That would be a huge concern for us.
Yes, but at the end of the day, I think if insurgents, which originally began by injuring Indian interests, Indian people, are now getting engaged to go and attack Myanmar people, that changes the scenario, isn't it? That means that they will be less of a threat to India, and they will be more of a contributor to the intra-Myanmar conflict. So yes, in terms of losses of human life, we should be concerned. But if all these anti-India insurgent groups, they find other vocations to keep themselves busy, I don't think Delhi would be losing its sleep over it.
There is, of course, a danger that if this subsides, they may turn against us once again. But I take your point. And the other thing that you mentioned is the connectivity and India's Look East policy, its connectivity to the countries beyond Myanmar. And my understanding is that there are infrastructure projects. So what is the fate of these infrastructure projects in all this conflict and chaos? How are those going? When are those being completed?
Yeah, in a simple language, I think the situation of standstill prevails now, and it is not surprising when there is a coup and there is a conflict and there is instability and there is fratricidal war going on. Who is talking about upgrading the trilateral highway, and who is interested in fully completing the Kaladan project? The situation is so unstable. People are fighting among each other that nobody is thinking of economic development. So yes, India should be very concerned. There's been a huge investment in terms of rupees, in terms of effort, in terms of investment of prestige and goodwill. But this is the situation where reasons of state take over and or overtake the conventional calculations. Both the trilateral highway and Kaladan, they are far from being completed, and blame has to be now placed on the instability, and therefore India's operational message is very clear. For God's sake, bring stability and peace and cooperation, and all that is possible through a dialogue, internal national dialogue. But are people listening? That is the issue.
In a sense, do you think the world has forgotten about Myanmar? Because you just said the Southeast Asian nations are also, ASEAN is also quite, including the group that was trying to negotiate between or or bring about some negotiations between the democratic forces and the junta. And there is also quiet from the rest of the world. In fact, the other conflicts have taken precedence. First, the Ukraine conflict, and now the Gaza conflict. So, in a sense, is this chaos, which is increasing and escalating by the day, has the world completely forgotten? And what might be the consequences of this?
I agree with you. I think if we define the world largely as the Western world, I think clearly Washington and European capitals have much more to be worried about conflicts which are happening closer to their homes. Ukraine and Gaza, Israel is virtually, their baby, so to say. But in the Indo-Pacific, I think we have to recognize that among the major conflicts, whether it is Taiwan, whether it is South China Sea, whether it is India-China border issue, Myanmar will continue to figure on the list. And whether the world takes it or ignores it, it will continue to create instability and serious difficulties for not just Myanmar, but all the countries which are neighboring to Myanmar and for the ASEAN region. So sooner or later, I think international community, particularly Indo-Pacific community, has no choice but to take serious interest in resolving or in helping to resolve this matter. Because let me assure you, Nirupama, nobody is standing to gain. Not the military, not the people of Myanmar, not even China and India. You would be struck by the similarity between Beijing and Delhi. They both want the stability and peace in Myanmar for their own purpose. So I would urge through your channel to scholars, thinkers, policymakers, governments, that you will be ignoring Myanmar at your own peril, at your own risk. It is a ticking time bomb. It needs to be addressed. It cannot be resolved by external players, but at the same time, if left entirely to the Myanmar people and their devices, it also cannot be resolved. There is a need for a strong synergy there.
So when Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Washington, there was a line in the joint statement between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, but in the India-US joint statement, which said that both sides would work for a stable and democratic Myanmar. And I want to understand if India has actually made any efforts to towards this end for democracy and for stability in Myanmar, stability through democracy in Myanmar.
That's a very good phrase you have used, stability through democracy. I think we can even say that real stability in this country would only come when there is genuine democracy, when this so-called transition to democracy is completed, when the country can move forward beyond the experiment of limited democracy that it experienced in the previous decade to genuine democracy, when people are elected, they wield power, and the Myanmar army plays a political role. That has to be the goal. And so this agreement between the US and India is laudable. I have no doubt that the implementation of this must have been elaborated and discussed when the recent 2+2 meeting of India-US took place in Delhi. I think it's very important for not just India and the US, but the neighboring countries to realize that the democratic aspirations of the people cannot be crushed for all the time to come. That their recognized and legitimately elected leader, not once but thrice or four times, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, who continues to be kept in solitary confinement in a prison on charges which really have been absurd. Until and unless she is released, other prisoners are released, national dialogue is started, and obviously a lot of humanitarian assistance is poured into the country. Myanmar is the sick man of Southeast Asia. And this sickness and this infection would continue to spread unless and until at least the Indo-Pacific community wakes up and starts taking serious action about it.
You just said that no one gains from this instability. Not any of the neighboring countries, not even the generals, but the generals seem to have seem to be profiting. They are supposed to be the most corrupt generals. They seem to be making money. The US puts out lists all the time sanctioning some of the top people in the military. So they seem to be making money in a sense, at least, if nothing else, even if they don't have control of the country. So how do we deal with a military that believes, that does not seem to be bothered about the outside world at all? Actually, it is happy to, in its isolation. It seems to think that is to its benefit.
No, the question of corruption, I think, you are a journalist, you are free to, depict them as such. I have really no direct knowledge in the last few years, but we know that the system there is such that there is a close nexus between business activities and the political power. This much I would grant you. As to generals are living and sleeping peacefully, that is, I think, is questionable. I think the whole set of scholars on Myanmar are saying that generals are very worried. In fact, the acting president said recently, and he was widely quoted, that if these reverses continue, the country could splinter completely. And this is a worry which I would like to underline. As I said, after independence in 1948, this state has not been completely built. There was never a single authority whose writ ran in the entire territory of the country. And now it is once again heading towards a kind of a disintegration. So I think it needs to work both for democracy and for safeguarding its national unity. And it is a very tall order. Nobody who follows Myanmar has a silver bullet for it, but everybody will have to work together. Just to answer in one line your question, what India is doing about it, you asked that earlier. I think there has been an attempt through the 1.5 track dialogue between Myanmar and its neighbors. I do not know where it has reached. I followed it up to a point. I also took part in some discussions, but that could be another route, provided key stakeholders within Myanmar willing to see that their interests lie in a peaceful dialogue and solution rather than the battle through arms.
One last question I want to ask. You said that the military, a senior general warned about how the country might splinter. Yet the military seems to thrive in this fear that the country will splinter, and that it is the only force that can actually unify the country, bring all these areas under control, that a democracy cannot do it. So, in a sense, they've also tried to keep the ethnic armed organizations apart. They've tried to play divide and rule between the ethnic armed organizations. But now, in the last few weeks, we have seen that the ethnic armed organizations are actually cooperating with each other across regions, whether in the Shan state or whether in the Chin state or whether in the south, and coming together and taking on the military in a united way. So does that really hold true, that that if the military is not in charge, or if there's not a strong centralizing force like the military in charge, that the country would splinter, and that there would be chaos, and that nobody will be in charge?
Two observations that can be made. Yes, your first point is absolutely widely believed, because this is part of the army's ideology from the beginning. They claim that they brought independence, from the Japanese and the British, and they claim that they ensured unity of the country, and they also claim that they brought economic development to the country. Now, at the end of it all, today, in the year of Lord 2023, you are seeing Myanmar in a very poor, dismal state on all these counts. As far as the ethnic groups are concerned, it's very typical. It has been seen in other parts of the world in history. They seem to be agreed on opposing and defeating the army. But are they agreed on a common vision for the future of Myanmar? On that, I'm seriously doubtful. Ethnic armed organizations have their own interests. They have their own methods, which is essentially through arms. They are not particularly, perhaps, working for democracy. And therefore, you can say, or I can certainly claim, that Myanmar is truly caught between the rock and the hard place. They will have to really, all of them, come down, show flexibility, and realize that if a united Myanmar is in their interest, they will have to work and they will have to sacrifice many of their interests and ideologies.
And just one sub question to this: you don't think that their cooperation in this present phase of their struggle against the junta is a signal that they are willing to cooperate and work together? In fact, even the NUG has put out a vision of a united federal Myanmar, in which the ethnic groups on the periphery of Myanmar get to participate in governance and in a democratic setup.
Yeah, I have my skepticism based on close study of the discussions which took place both in the time of President Thein Sein and later when Madame Aung San Suu Kyi was in charge. The concept of federal union, propounded by the Bamar representatives is of one kind, and propounded by the ethnic groups is of another kind. The two do not seem to match. And when ethnic groups are fighting the military, they are not all of them fighting for democracy. They are not all of them fighting for federal union. And that is what makes the task of the nation building so much more complicated and so much more challenging.
On that note, thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia. Thanks for your time. Thank you all for watching South Asia Matters. Follow us on AwaazSouthAsia.com, read our stories, and if you like this video, press the like button, press the subscribe button. Thank you very much.